The morning started like any other, with the familiar scent of brewing coffee and the soft hum of the refrigerator. It was a comfortable quiet, the kind I'd built over decades of solitary mornings since my husband passed. But that peace shattered when I saw my suitcase standing by the front door, looking as out of place as a tombstone in a garden. My son, Luke, stood there with his arms crossed over his chest, a gesture of defiance I hadn't seen since he was a teenager. "You need to find your own place, Mom," he said, his voice colder than the December rain lashing against the windows. The words were so absurd, so alien, that I thought he was joking, a cruel, unfunny prank. But his expression was hard, his eyes void of the warmth I'd known his entire life. He then tossed my worn leather purse onto the front steps, where it landed in a puddle with a soft splash. My own house. The one I'd paid off after countless night shifts, sacrificing sleep and sanity to give him a stable home. When I looked up, bewildered and heartbroken, he was already inside, and the unmistakable sound of a deadbolt sliding into place was followed by the grinding noise of him changing the locks. I pounded on the solid oak door, the rhythmic thud a desperate counterpoint to my own frantic heartbeat. "Luke, please. Just talk to me." My cries were swallowed by the wind, my words turning to vapor in the frigid air. Through the pebbled glass of the front door, I could see his silhouette moving within the warm glow of the living room, my living room. He was deliberately ignoring me. The neighbors' curtains twitched, their shadowy figures watching the unfolding drama of a mother cast out by her own child. The humiliation was a physical ache, sharp and deep. "You're not my problem anymore." His voice finally cut through the wood, muffled but clear. The words struck me with the force of a physical blow, leaving me breathless. A problem? I, who had held his hand through fevers, celebrated his every minor victory, and worked myself to the bone to ensure he never felt the sting of lack. That night, I sought refuge in my car, parked 2 streets away. Wrapped in a threadbare blanket from the trunk, I stared at the illuminated windows of the home I'd built with my own 2 hands, a ghost haunting the edges of a life that was no longer mine. Dawn broke gray and unforgiving, outlining the world in shades of despair. I drove back to my street, a foolish sliver of hope still flickering in my heart that it had all been a terrible nightmare. But the reality was worse. There, standing in my kitchen window, was a woman I'd never seen before. She was young, with sleek, dark hair and an air of polished confidence. She was flipping pancakes at my stove, wearing my favorite blue silk robe as if it were her own. When she caught sight of my car, her lips curved into a smug smile, and she raised a hand in a lazy, mocking wave, as if I were a curious tourist instead of the woman whose home she had invaded. A moment later, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Luke, brutally concise. "Stop coming here. Her name is Tara. She doesn't like it." Tara. The name tasted like poison. I watched through the window as she and Luke laughed together, her hand resting intimately on his arm. He leaned in and kissed her forehead, a gesture of affection in the very space where he had rejected me. The life I had sacrificed everything to build for him had been handed over to a stranger. For days, my life became a cycle of futile attempts to connect with my son. I called 17 times in the first week, each call going straight to a voicemail I knew he wouldn't check. She answered once, her voice dripping with condescending sweetness. "He's done taking care of you," Tara had chirped, as if explaining a simple concept to a toddler. "It's time you learned to stand on your own 2 feet." Then she hung up, leaving me in stunned silence. Stand on my own? I had been standing on my own since I was 29. A young widow drowning in grief and medical bills after my husband's fatal construction accident. I had worked double shifts as a nurse, my feet aching and my spirit weary, so Luke could have everything. I'd skipped meals to afford his school trips and put my own dreams on indefinite hold, so he could chase his. All of it, every sacrifice, reduced to a patronizing lecture from the woman sleeping in my bed. The humiliation burned hotter than grief. As I sat in my car, staring at the rain-streaked windshield, a long-forgotten memory surfaced. Luke, 3 years ago, asking me to add his name to the property deed. I'd said no back then, gently but firmly. It wasn't about a lack of trust. It was about heeding the advice of my estate lawyer. Keep the assets solely in your name, Zara, she'd warned. It's the cleanest way to protect your future. Luke had sulked for a week, but eventually dropped it. Now, sitting in the cold vinyl seat of my car outside the county records office, I sent a silent prayer that I hadn't misremembered, that no document had been signed in a moment of weakness. My hands trembled as I filled out the public records request form. The clerk, a woman with a weary face, took my paper and disappeared into a back room for what felt like an eternity. Each ticking second on the wall clock amplified my anxiety. She finally returned, her expression unreadable, and slid a document across the worn wooden counter. My eyes scanned the text, my breath catching in my throat. There it was in clear, official type. Zara Moore, sole owner. No joint tenancy. No co-ownership. Nothing. He had never filed a transfer. The house was still, unequivocally, legally mine. A wave of relief washed over me, so potent it almost brought me to my knees. The despair began to recede, replaced by a cold, sharp resolve. The legal aid center smelled of stale coffee, old paper, and a faint, lingering scent of desperation. It was a place for last resorts, and I was certainly at mine. I was introduced to Mr. Callan, a calm, soft-spoken attorney with kind, weary eyes that had seen more than their share of human misery. He guided me to a small, cluttered office and listened intently as my story spilled out. The betrayal, the eviction, the woman in my home. He didn't interrupt once, his gaze steady and patient. When I finally fell silent, my voice hoarse with emotion, his expression hardened. The kindness in his eyes was replaced by a steely glint of professional indignation. "Mrs. Moore, what your son has done is not just cruel, it's illegal," he stated, his voice a balm of certainty. "He has performed an illegal eviction. By residing in your property without your consent or a lease agreement, he is, in the eyes of the law, trespassing." The words were like oxygen to a drowning woman. For the first time, I felt I had a foothold. "So, I can get my house back?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. A small, determined smile touched his lips. "Let's get your house back, Mrs. Moore." We filed the official eviction notice on a Tuesday. Mr. Callan insisted on delivering it himself. He wanted to witness Luke's reaction firsthand. I waited in the car down the street, my stomach twisting into a tight, painful knot. This wasn't what I wanted. I didn't want to hurt my son. I simply wanted my life back. But when Luke emerged from the house and took the papers from Mr. Callan, his face contorted into a mask of pure fury. He stormed toward my car, his strides long and aggressive, and wrenched my door open. "You'd actually do this? To your own son?" he roared, his voice cracking with disbelief and rage. Passers-by stopped to stare at the scene, a mother being berated by the child she raised. His eyes were wild, a terrifying echo of his father's on the day of his accident. A look of being cornered, scared, and dangerously angry. "You threw me out, Luke," I said, my voice quiet but steady, refusing to be intimidated. "I'm just asking for what's legally mine." He leaned in, his face inches from mine, his breath hot with fury. "You'll regret this," he hissed, spitting on the pavement at my feet before turning and stalking back to the house. That night, the cold deepened, and with it came a new level of violation. I returned to my car after a fitful sleep at a cheap motel to find all 4 of my tires slashed, the rubber gaping open like wounds. There was no doubt in my mind who was responsible. It was Luke, or her, or both of them, acting out their fury under the cover of darkness. I imagined them laughing, their malicious act a twisted form of bonding. But this time, tears didn't come. A strange, chilling calm settled over me. The weeping, pleading mother was gone, replaced by someone methodical and resolute. I took out my phone and meticulously photographed the damage from every angle, the flash illuminating the deep cuts in the tires. I documented the time, the location, and then sent the images to Mr. Callan with a simple, 3-word text. "Is this helpful?" He called within minutes, his voice sharp with a lawyer's satisfaction. "Very helpful," he confirmed. "This is witness intimidation and destruction of property. It significantly strengthens our case." I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was gathering evidence. A week later, a frantic call from my neighbor confirmed my new, cold resolve was necessary. "Zara, you need to get over here. You need to see what they've done to your things." When I arrived, my front yard looked like it had been hit by a tornado of malice. Black trash bags were piled high on the curb, many of them split open, their contents spilling onto the damp lawn like entrails. My life, curated over 57 years, was being treated as garbage. I walked through the debris in a daze, each discovery a fresh stab to the heart. My wedding photos, the images of a young, hopeful couple, were torn in half. My nursing school medals and certificates were crumpled and stained with mud. And there, glinting in a puddle, was my late husband's watch, the beautiful timepiece I had been saving for Luke to pass on to his own son one day. It was all there, a testament to their cruelty. From the porch, Tara watched me, sipping a glass of red wine from one of my crystal glasses. "Just clearing out some of the old junk," she called out, her voice bright and cheerful. "Hope you don't mind." Rage, white-hot and pure, surged through me, but I channeled it, kneeling and methodically sifting through the wreckage. It was then, at the bottom of a soggy cardboard box, that my fingers brushed against a plastic folder I had completely forgotten existed. The cheap plastic sleeve had protected its contents from the worst of the rain. My hands, trembling with a mixture of anger and dawning hope, pulled the documents free. Inside was a complete history of my ownership, a paper trail of my sacrifice. There were the original mortgage documents, every single payment receipt for the last 23 years, and tax records clearly showing me as the sole property taxpayer. But the final item was the most powerful. It was a notarized statement from my late husband, David, written just 2 months before he died. In his clear, strong handwriting, he declared his wish that the house was to remain solely in my name, a protected asset to ensure I would always have security and a roof over my head. My lawyer had filed it with our estate plan, and in the fog of grief, I had forgotten its specifics. Holding it now, I realized it was more than just proof of ownership. It was a sword. This was ironclad, undeniable evidence that no judge could dismiss. It was my husband, reaching across the years to protect me one last time. I carefully dried each precious page, placed them in a new, clean folder, and knew I wasn't just fighting for a house anymore. I was fighting for my dignity. The courtroom felt small and stuffy, charged with a tension that made it hard to breathe. Luke sat across the aisle with a slick, expensive-looking lawyer, wearing a tailored suit I'd certainly never bought him. He projected an aura of a wronged victim, his expression carefully crafted to evoke sympathy. When he spoke to the judge, his voice was measured and calm as he painted me as an unstable, controlling mother who refused to let him live his own life. "I only asked her to leave because she was interfering with my relationship with Tara," he lied smoothly. "This eviction notice is her way of punishing me for finally growing up." His lawyer nodded gravely. Then it was our turn. Mr. Callan rose slowly, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to their performance. He opened his briefcase and laid out the contents of my folder on the plaintiff's table. One by one, he presented the mortgage receipts, the tax records, and finally, my husband's notarized letter. As the judge examined the documents, the color drained from Luke's face. Tara leaned in, whispering frantically in his ear, but he seemed frozen. The judge looked up, her expression stern. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. "You have 30 days to vacate the premises." Luke stood up so abruptly that his chair clattered to the floor. "This is insane. You can't be serious," he shouted at the judge, his carefully constructed composure shattering completely. A bailiff took a step toward him, but Luke was already storming out of the courtroom, shoving the door open with such force that it slammed against the wall. I remained seated, my hands folded neatly in my lap, a statue of stillness amidst his chaos. Mr. Callan placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. A few minutes later, as we exited the courthouse, We saw the aftermath of his rage. In the parking lot, Luke was repeatedly punching the hood of his car, a fancy sports car I now suspected was funded by my stolen identity. He struck the metal again and again, his raw knuckles splitting and bleeding. A primal part of me, the mother who had kissed his scraped knees and soothed his fears, wanted to run to him, to take his wounded hand and make it better. But then, the memory of that cold, lonely night in my car surfaced, sharp and painful. I remembered my precious memories lying discarded in the mud. I steeled my heart and turned away. I had naively believed the judge's ruling was the end of it. It was merely the beginning of their next assault. 2 days later, a sharp knock echoed through my motel room. I opened the door to a police officer, his expression impassive. "Ma'am, are you Zara Moore?" he inquired. My heart plummeted. He served me with an emergency restraining order, filed by Tara. The document was a work of fiction, claiming I had been stalking them, making threatening phone calls, and harassing them at the property. The order legally barred me from coming within 500 feet of my own house. Panic seized me, cold and suffocating. I immediately called Mr. Callan, my voice trembling with disbelief. "They can't do this, can they? They can't keep me away from my own home with lies." I expected him to be concerned, to strategize. Instead, to my utter astonishment, he laughed. It was a short, sharp bark of genuine amusement. "Oh, Mrs. Moore, she has just made a colossal mistake," he said, his voice brimming with confidence. "Filing a fraudulent restraining order is a serious offense. This is going to backfire on them in the most spectacular way. Trust me." Mr. Callan wasted no time. He issued a subpoena for the security footage from my neighbor's front-facing camera, the silent witness to the entire ordeal. We sat together in his office, the glow of the monitor illuminating our faces as we watched the recordings. The evidence was damning and irrefutable. There was Tara, dragging my belongings out to the curb, her laughter audible even on the grainy video as she tossed my husband's watch into a pile of trash. The next clip showed Luke, his face contorted with rage, screaming at me through my car window while I sat motionless inside. The footage clearly showed I never left my vehicle, never approached them, never uttered a threat. It was a complete and total fabrication. At the emergency hearing to review the order, the judge watched the footage in stony silence, her lips thinning into a hard line. When the video ended, she turned her icy gaze on Tara and her lawyer. "This restraining order is dismissed, effective immediately," she snapped. "And, counselor, I am filing a note in the record regarding your client's blatant abuse of the court system." Tara's face flushed a deep, mottled red. She had finally overplayed her hand, and the humiliation was written all over her face. On the 30th day, exactly as the court order mandated, 2 sheriff's deputies arrived at my house. I stood across the street with Mr. Callan, a silent observer of my own reclamation. Luke answered the door, looking smaller and defeated. All the fight had gone out of him. He packed his things in a grim silence, his eyes fixed on the floor, never once looking in my direction. Tara, on the other hand, was a whirlwind of impotent fury. She screamed that it was illegal, that I was a vindictive monster, and threatened to sue everyone from the sheriff's department to the judge. The deputies, models of professional calm, simply ignored her hysterics and continued their work. From the curb, she pointed a shaking finger at me. "You're a witch. You're ruining his life because you can't stand to see him happy." I didn't flinch. I didn't respond. I just stood there, steady as a stone, watching as the last of their boxes were loaded into a rented truck. As they drove away, Tara gave me one last vulgar gesture from the passenger window. Only when their truck disappeared around the corner did I allow myself to move, walking slowly toward my front door, the key feeling heavy and real in my hand. The moment I stepped inside, the violation hit me like a physical force. The air was stale, thick with the cloying scent of Tara's cheap perfume and stale cigarette smoke. It was a desecration of the clean, calm space I had always kept. The damage was everywhere. Cigarette burns scarring my beautiful oak coffee table, dark red wine stains soaking into the living room carpet, and angry, fist-sized holes punched into the drywall. My son's childhood bedroom was eerily empty, stripped of every trace of him. But my bedroom, the master suite, had been ransacked. Drawers were pulled out, their contents dumped on the floor, and my clothes were scattered and trampled. The kitchen was a disaster of greasy, unwashed dishes and empty liquor bottles. Numbly, I began to clean, the simple, repetitive motions away to reclaim my space. It was then that I saw it, a single white envelope on the granite countertop. My name was scrawled across the front in Luke's familiar handwriting. With a sense of dread, I tore it open. The note inside was short, each word a venomous dart. "You'll regret making me homeless. This isn't over, Mom." 3 weeks of relentless work passed. I scrubbed every surface until my hands were raw, spackled the holes in the walls, and hired professionals to steam the carpets. Slowly, the ghost of their presence began to fade, and the house started to feel like my sanctuary again. And then the phone calls began. They came from numbers I didn't recognize, from people with aggressive, demanding voices. They were debt collectors. "Mrs. Moore, we're calling about an overdue balance of $6,000 on your Pinnacle Rewards card." "I don't have a Pinnacle Rewards card," I said, confused. "Ma'am, the account was opened 4 months ago using your name and social security number," the agent insisted. My blood ran cold. I requested copies of the applications for all the accounts they mentioned. When the paperwork arrived in the mail, my worst fears were confirmed. My personal information was correct, but the signature on each application was a careful, yet imperfect, forgery of my own. Luke had stolen my identity, opening card after card and maxing them out. When I showed the statements to Mr. Callan, his calm demeanor vanished. His face became an unreadable mask. "Now it's criminal," he said quietly, his voice dangerously low. Together, Mr. Callan and I walked into the local police station. The detective assigned to us was a woman named Diaz, with tired eyes that had seen the worst of people but missed nothing. She led us to a small, sterile interview room and listened patiently as I laid out the entire sordid story, from the illegal eviction to the discovery of the fraudulent debts. I handed over the pile of credit card statements and the applications with their forged signatures. "What's the total damage?" she asked, her pen hovering over a form. "Just under $15,000, Mr. Callan supplied. Detective Diaz let out a low whistle. "That crosses the threshold into felony grand larceny and identity theft." She carefully collected all the documents, creating copies and sealing the originals in evidence bags. "These investigations can take time," she warned me. "It could be months before the DA has enough to press charges." I nodded, a strange sense of calm settling over me. I had waited my whole life to find my strength. I could wait a little longer for justice. That evening, as I was locking up, a knock came at my front door. I opened it and froze. It was Tara, looking like a ghost of her former self. Tara looked utterly broken. Her expensive clothes were rumpled, her hair was unwashed, and her eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. The smug, confident woman who had tormented me was gone, replaced by this fragile, trembling stranger. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice a raw whisper. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to slam the door in her face, but a flicker of pity, or perhaps morbid curiosity, made me step aside. She sank onto my newly cleaned couch and immediately burst into tears. "He's gone," she sobbed into her hands. "He left me. He took all my money and just disappeared." I felt no sympathy, only a cold, detached sense of vindication. "Why are you here, Tara?" I asked, my voice flat. She fumbled in her purse and pulled out a small, silver flash drive. "Because he used you, but he used me too. And you need to see what he really is." She pressed the drive into my hand. "There are videos on here. Him talking to his friends, bragging about the whole plan. About you, about me, about everything." I closed my hand around the small piece of plastic. "Why give this to me?" I asked. She finally met my gaze, her eyes filled with a raw, shared betrayal. "Because I'm done protecting him." That night, I sat alone in my quiet living room and plugged the flash drive into my laptop. Luke's face filled the screen, slick with sweat and distorted by a drunken laugh. "My mom's such an old fool," he slurred to someone off camera. "She actually thinks I care about this dump. I'll sell it the second her name is off it." Click. The next video. Him bragging about the credit cards. "It's free money, man. The old woman has perfect credit. She won't even know what hit her until the bills come." Click. Another one, this time detailing his plan to get me out of the house, with Tara laughing beside him. I watched every second of every video, each one a nail in the coffin of the son I thought I knew. This cruel, calculating man was a stranger to me. The grief was immense, but my resolve was absolute. The next morning, I drove back to the police station and handed the flash drive to Detective Diaz. She watched the videos in my presence, her expression hardening with each clip. When the last one finished, she looked at me, her tired eyes filled with grim certainty. "We have more than enough now." The arrest warrant was issued that afternoon. They took him into custody on a Thursday morning. I didn't watch it happen, but Detective Diaz called to inform me. "He's being held on charges of identity theft, grand larceny, and forgery," she said clinically. "Bail is set high. He won't be getting out." I thanked her and hung up, feeling not a shred of the triumph I had expected. The feeling was just empty. 2 days later, my phone rang again. It was the detective. "He's asking to see you," she said, her tone neutral. My first instinct was to refuse. What more was there to say? But a stubborn, deeply buried part of me, the mother, needed to see his face one last time. The jail visitation room was cold and smelled of antiseptic. We sat on opposite sides of a thick glass partition. He was wearing a standard-issue orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on his frame. He looked diminished, his eyes hollowed out, his hands trembling. When he saw me, his face crumpled like a child's. He picked up the receiver. "Why'd you do this to me, Mom?" he asked, his voice cracking. I wanted to scream. "You did this to yourself." Instead, a quieter, more painful truth emerged. "Because I still love you," I whispered. "And that's why it hurts so much." My words seemed to break something inside him. He began to sob, great, shuddering gasps that shook his entire body. "I know I messed up," he choked out, his voice muffled by his hands. "I know what I did was wrong. But it wasn't all me." I waited, my heart a stone in my chest. "It was Tara," he continued, wiping his face with his sleeve. "She found out I'd been stealing medical supplies from my old job at the clinic. She had videos. She threatened to go to the police, to ruin my life, unless I did exactly what she wanted." My blood went cold. This was a new, darker layer to the nightmare. "What did she want?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Everything," he said, his eyes filled with a desperate, pleading light. "Money, a place to live, control. She came up with the whole plan. Kicking you out, selling the house, opening the credit cards to fund her lifestyle. She said it was the only way to keep her quiet and protect both of us from her threats." He looked at me, the son I barely recognized, and delivered the final, devastating blow. "I thought I was protecting you from her, Mom. I thought I was choosing the lesser of two evils." I left the jail feeling like the world had tilted on its axis. I drove straight to Mr. Callan's office and recounted Luke's entire story, every detail of Tara's blackmail and manipulation. He listened with a grim, focused intensity, taking meticulous notes. "This changes the entire dynamic," he said when I finished. "Luke is still culpable, but Tara is the architect. She's guilty of extortion." He paused, his mind clearly working. "Did she give you any way to contact her?" I suddenly remembered. When she was here, she gave me her number. She said to call if I needed to talk. A thin, predatory smile touched Mr. Callan's lips. "Perfect. Call her. Put the phone on speaker and record the entire conversation. Get her to admit it." That night, with my heart pounding, I made the call. Fueled by anger and alcohol, Tara confessed to everything. She bragged about blackmailing Luke, about masterminding the eviction, about using my information to commit fraud. She thought I was calling to plead or bargain. Instead, I was gathering the final piece of evidence. The next morning, I handed the pristine audio recording to Detective Diaz. Within a week, Tara was arrested for extortion, conspiracy, and fraud. Justice was messy, but it was finally being served. With Tara facing serious prison time, Luke's cooperation earned him a plea deal, probation, mandatory rehabilitation for substance abuse, and extensive community service. I didn't attend his final hearing. My courtroom battles were over. Instead, I stayed home, methodically painting over the last of the holes in my walls, covering the scars of his rage with a fresh, clean coat of white. The months that followed were a period of slow, quiet healing. The house began to breathe again, filled not with anger and perfume, but with the scent of fresh flowers from the garden I was replanting. I bought a new coffee table. I hung new photos on the walls, pictures of my parents, my husband, my friends. Luke was in a court-mandated program, working to rebuild the wreckage of his life. I visited him once a month. Our conversations were stilted and awkward. He could rarely meet my eyes, the shame a palpable barrier between us. I had learned, through therapy and time, to forgive him, but I knew I would never forget. Some wounds don't vanish. They simply become a part of who you are. Then one day, he called and asked to meet me outside of our scheduled visit. We met at a small, neutral coffee shop halfway between my home and his rehabilitation center. He looked different, healthier, the puffiness gone from his face, his eyes clearer than I'd seen them in years. After a moment of awkward silence, he slid a thick manila envelope across the table toward me. "What's this?" I asked, my voice cautious. "Just open it, Mom." Inside was a legally prepared quitclaim deed. It was signed, notarized, and officially filed with the county, permanently relinquishing any and all potential future claims he might ever have on my house. It made my sole ownership absolute and incontestable forever. "I don't want you to ever have to worry again," he said, his voice steady and quiet. "I want you to have peace." Tears welled in my eyes, not tears of sadness or anger, but of a profound, complicated closure. "Thank you, Luke," I whispered. He gave me a small, sad smile and stood to leave. As he walked toward the door, I called his name. He turned. "Now," I said, my voice gentle but firm, "now you'll finally understand what home really means." He took my roof, my safety, and my peace, but I rebuilt them, brick by legal brick. And this time, no one will ever throw me out again.